Now, on to the proper way to perform a good, solid pre-trip inspection. It will be vital to do it the same way every time. If you'll notice that in a cockpit of a large commercial airliner, there are usually two seasoned pilots using a checklist to go through their pre-trip inspection. One reads from the list, the other one actually does the checking to ensure that the task has been completed. These pilots have as much as 30 years experience and they still use a checklist so that they don't forget something. They are meticulous in how they perform their pre-trips, and there is no good reason you shouldn't do the same. The importance of checking to make sure that everything is road ready can mean the difference between safe and a successful journey, and one that is ripe with problems that can cause harm to both the driver and the motoring public. Okay, are we ready? Then let's get started. First, as our driver approaches the vehicle, he looks for any abnormalities that jump out. Is there anything that looks out of place or slightly off kilter? He bends down and looks underneath the tractor and trailer. Is there anything leaking, or is there puddles where there shouldn't be? Is the vehicle leaning one way or the other? Sometimes a potential problem will jump out at you without you really having to look for it. Many times, though, it's not that easy. Once in the cab of the tractor, he has checked the seat, adjusted in proper air cushion. It's time to check everything else. All those knobs, buttons, and gauges are there for a reason. So let's make sure that everything is in proper working order. Check the following: temp gauge, voltmeter, air gauge, mirrors, both drivers and passenger sides, windshield, turning indicators, haz lights, power steering, wiper, washer, city horn and air horn, air brakes, DEF gauge, oil gauge, fuel tank. Once our driver has completed the pre-tripping the inside of the tractor, it's time to attack the outside and under the hood. Next, release the hood latches on the driver's side and then over to the passenger side. Now, our driver steps to the front of the tractor and gives a gentle tug on the hood. Should just ease over so that it can begin the pre-trip inspection of the engine and other areas. First thing he's going to look over are the tires and the wheel assembly. He checks to see if the rubber around the outside has good tread depth and is it free of blemishes, knots, cuts, bubbles, punctures, abrasions, or anything that may appear good operation. Also, he is checking for even wear on the tire. He checks the rim for any cracks or any other damage. He will check the lug nuts for rust, which could indicate a loose nut. He will also put hands on each lug nut to check for looseness. He will check the center of the wheel assembly to ensure that there are no leaks and that all is secure and proper. Now for engine proper. He looks over the hoses and makes sure they are not loose or that there are no cracks or splits and that they are secure and that there are no leaks of any kind. Next, he looks over the wires for anything that might be loose or worn. He checks cables and harnesses for any issues such as something being loose or worn or has abrasions. Next, he looks over the steering column and checks to ensure it's secure. He looks over the nuts and bolts, checking for secureness or to see if anything is missing. He looks at the fuel filter, making sure it's secured properly and that there is no water in the filter. He checks over the oil filter and the oil dipstick to make sure that there is proper amount of oil. Then he gives a tug and shakes on the shocks to make sure that they are attached properly. Then a quick look over the leaf springs, hinges, and brake calipers. The most important part of a good, thorough pre-trip inspection is to put hands on everything to ensure that there is nothing that is or coming loose, leaking, slipping, worn, or in any way needs maintenance. If he finds anything that is out of sorts, he will make sure that he gets that repaired before he hits the road. Better to have an issue addressed while not moving than to find out the hard way that they have a problem while going down the road. Now on to the other side of the engine. He checks the frame for any cracks or loose nuts and bolts or anything that looks out of order. He also is checking the shocks on this side as well. He gives a quick tug on the wires and hoses on this side as well, looking for potential problems. He checks the turbo for any issues in the air intake and radiator hoses to make sure it is good and not leaking or no cracks or abrasions. He checks the coolant level to make sure it is where it needs to be. He also checks all coolant hoses to make sure that they are leak-free and secure. Now that the thorough pre-trip of the engine compartment has been completed, he comes around to lower the hood and make sure that both sides are secure with the hood latch and continues with the remaining part of his pre-trip inspection. He checks the fuel tank for securement and that the fuel cap is properly attached. Our driver begins his walk around by checking his hoses and making sure that they are secured to the hose rack. Then he checks the tires for impediments that may be stuck between the tires. Then he checks the lug nuts and tread depth. He also checks for any cuts, abrasions, bubbles, or other abnormalities. Then he checks the spring hangers, shocks, and airbags. Next comes the mud flaps for securement and for reflective tape on the bracket. Then the tail lights on the tractor. Next, he ensures that the document holder is secure and the registration is not expired and complete. Now he checks both the dolly legs and the handle is secure. He checks the straps and the toolbox for securement, and the side marker lights are clean and working properly. He checks the pistons for leaks and the rear trailer lights that they are clean and in proper working order. He checks to see that the license plate is proper and attached and that the ICC bumper is in proper position. Then he checks the mud flaps for securement and reflective tape. Then he walks up to the passenger side of the trailer and repeats the process, checking tires and fenders and lights to ensure that everything is in proper working order. He checks the side of the trailer for reflective tape. Then as he approaches the passenger side of the tractor, he checks the pump and compressor for securement and leaks. He checks the fuel tank for securement and that the fuel cap is properly attached. He checks the passenger side steps to ensure that they are securely attached. That completes the pre-trip walk-around inspection.